The member for Buninyong.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. I too rise to speak in support of the Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment Bill 2019. I rise with somewhat of a heavy heart. Whilst I am filled with pride about this amendment and what it'll do, it has hauled me back to very, very strong personal memories of working for the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras during that period. I was just looking on the internet a little earlier and was reminded of a documentary called Rampant, which I would recommend to anyone who is interested in that period. Really extraordinary documentary about the way that Australia reacted to it. So I think the first person diagnosed, which we didn't know what it was then, was in 1983, and the young man, he was known as the New York Gardener. So he had come over here. By 1987, I mean, at that point, no one knew what was going on. And in the documentary, I talk about Rampant. There was a good piece about Bill Bowtell. Bill Bowtell worked for Neil Blewett during that period, and I think they said that when they got their briefing, so it would have been 83, they got their briefing as they entered Parliament. They were told about, I think it was called GRID then, which was a gay-related, I can't remember the rest of the wording, but obviously at that point no one knew what we were facing. There was an interesting line in this documentary where Bill talks about being in Canberra during the week and trying to sort of deal with what was coming, and then going back to Sydney and Darlinghurst, where the community, it was a really difficult period because in some ways the 80s saw the community start to be loud and proud, Darlinghurst, that strip in Darlinghurst was just the best fun, and we were all having a great time, and then to be hit with this devastating news. So Bowtell talks about, going back to Sydney and no one knew what it was. They didn't know if it was contagious, and looking around the room and thinking, where are we? What's happening? I started working for the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, I think it was about 86. So by that stage, we were getting an understanding of what it was. And I have to say, as I did in fact say in my inaugural speech, it was probably one of the most moving and important periods in my life. I was a 24-year-old in media and marketing, and I worked for an amazing man called Bruce Pollack, who was very involved in the gay community in Sydney and as we tried to manage this epidemic. So I started off as a 24-year-old working for Bruce, and we were consulting for the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras. It was interesting, at that stage people used to ask me about why I was working for Mardi Gras, and I was fairly young and naive, but it was that basic nub. No one is going to tell me who I can and can't love, and that has nothing to do with sexuality. It's just my right. It's my right to love who I want. And so I think I was really driven by inequality and injustice during that period. It was, as I say, there was a happy time to some degree, and then really as HIV and the reality of it started to come in, we were a community under siege. The ever delightful Fred Nile called it the gay plague, and that level of it was God's will to wipe us all out. And look, I have really personal friends that I watched die. So there was an amazing fellow called Greg Shears, and Greg was a theatre director and a television director. He worked for the ABC, did all of our favourites, A Country Practice, Neighbours, really fine theatrical talent, and we lost Greg. And during that period, while we were losing friends, we were also listening to Fred Nile say that we deserved it. Sorry. It was a pretty pretty rough time to go through. But, you know, the bright spark in that was, in fact, watching what the Labor government did. Blewett was extraordinary, and I think that was with the Sound Counsel of Bill Botell. They went into the community and they talked to the community, and to this day, Australia is recognised as an absolute leader in how we manage that epidemic. It was interesting. This bill obviously might seem, or the amendment might seem like a small thing, but you know, it's those incredibly small things that can speak and change us. So, when I was working on Mardi Gras, the ABC televised the first Mardi Gras, and I was was a media coordinator, and I was really quite young and naive then, still working things out. You know, and we used to go to meetings at Mardi Gras, and they wanted a lot of control. We didn't want this just to be, you know, the first televisation just to be drag queens and sequins. It always was, and to me always will be, a protest march, the Mardi Gras, and it was really important that we made sure that the ABC respected it for that. So, you know, I was a bit young and naive, but I learnt those lessons, and we talked to those journos and we said, you know, if you want to do this, you've got to carry our message. And there was little interesting things I learnt, you know, that the use of language. So even talk of victim, you know, we don't say people who are suffering from cancer are victims. It was an illness. It was just a medical condition. And why did we have to be victims? So it was just an amazing period for me to listen and learn, and really to understand the importance of those small moments. So look, this amendment will make a huge difference. I stood with some very, very dear friends when they were tested, and as the previous speaker pointed out, went through those agonising, I mean, it was a couple of weeks in the 80s, and you sat there wondering what was going to become of you at the end of it. So while this might seem a very small amendment, to those of us who've been fighting against discrimination to people living with HIV, it's really an important one. It changes it. It recognises it's an illness. I had the good fortune to work at Ballarat Community Health before I came to this place, and Ballarat Community Health is an extraordinary organisation which lots of different services, but one of the things that works so well there is that there are lots of different services, and so no one knows in the waiting room whether you're there for the sexual health clinic, whether you're there for domestic violence counselling, or whether you're there to see a GP. And I know how important that was, certainly talking to the sexual health clinicians, that it meant people could feel relaxed, and I think this bill will go some way to achieving that. Like the other speakers, I am incredibly proud of our government and our Premier for their support for the LGBTQI community, you know, and in many ways expressed, as you say, by being the first Premier to march in the Pride March. I've been marching since 1985 and I'm going to keep marching. It's a community that means a lot to me, and it's a community that have been through so much discrimination. We owe them. We owe them for that discrimination that we have put them through, and a bill like this will go, or the amendment will go in some ways to normalising the processes that they have to go to. While I was at Community Health, Community Health was responsible for the PrEP trials in Ballarat, and that was great to see those trials roll out, and now it become available on the PBS. And that's an extraordinary advance. The only difficulty for me when I look at how far we've come and the advancements in treatment is I think about people like Greg Shears, and I think, why couldn't you have held on longer, Greg? Why couldn't we have moved faster? I lost a lot of beautiful friends, and I guess in some ways for me this bill is an acknowledgement of their lives, their fight, and I hope that we continue to work hard to make sure that our LGBTQI community feel a part of this community and are never discriminated against again. Thank you, Speaker.